I was someone that just recently learned about Christian apologetics, maybe 2, 3 years ago,
Hmm.
and I felt comfortable with my relationship with God. I liked having that relationship emphasis with Him, connecting with Him through prayer, through song, faith, and I thought, apologetics it's good for the people that don't have faith, but I'm not sure that I really want to go into this
Hmm.
until someone pointed out that, hey, maybe your kids are going to need it. Maybe other people that you care about need you to learn about this.
Right.
So, what would you say to someone that is completely happy not learning about Christian apologetics and not,
Mhm.
introducing doubts perhaps, or maybe bringing those to the surface? Mhm.
Well, I would go to scripture. First Peter 3:15 says that we should be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks us why we believe, to have a reason for the hope that is within us, and to present this with gentleness and respect. So, uh, someone may say, an unbeliever, well, you have a strong faith and you attend a church, but I'm not even sure there is a God. So, if you can say, well, I know there is a God because I have a relationship with him, that does some work apologetically. But someone might say, well, what about Darwinism? Or what about all the evil in the world? How could a good and all powerful God allow so much evil? So, at that point, you really need to develop your skills in defending the faith. And then also, as you said, for the children, next generation, if your children go to state schools, they will not be taught a Christian worldview as the basis for all their studies. Far worse, they will be taught a naturalistic worldview, and they'll be taught most likely LGBTQ values and so on, which I think is a good argument to try to homeschool or send your children to Christian schools. But you can't shelter your children or yourself, really, from the challenges of an unbelieving world. And I found that one of the most profound ways of knowing God in my life has been, of course, I'm a philosopher, but seeing that it's logical, that it fits the facts, it gives meaning to life. I don't have to be afraid of an atheist philosopher or a Muslim apologist or a Hindu apologist or anything, because Christianity is true and rational and relevant to the whole of life. So, really, scripture says, be ready, have an answer to those who challenge you, who wonder why you believe. So, you might say apologetics is for the experts, the philosophers, the pastors, the theologians. It is, but it's also for every Christian. And so you have to look at your setting and say, well, how much of apologetics do I need to know to be faithful to Christ in my particular situation as a mother, as a businessman, uh, whatever it is. And very few people will have the time or the energy or the interest to go into it as deeply as I have. I mean, if I can be so bold, this is my newest second edition of Christian Apologetics, and it's rather big. You may notice it's 839 pages. The first one was 758 pages. But you see, I've taught this for 30 years, more than 30 years. And God's given me the kind of life where He gave me lots of time to write and research and teach. And I love to write, research, and teach. So I can help people that don't have that much time to develop their skills, as can so many other Christian apologetics apologists out there like Lee Strobel or J.P. Moreland, Bill Craig, Sean McDowell, Paul Copound. We have so many really excellent Christian apologists out there. Stephen Meyer does a lot of work with Christianity and science. His book, Return of the God Hypothesis, is tremendous.
Yeah, I think I just recently purchased that last book on
Good.
my shelf somewhere. I have a lot of
Yeah.
Christian apologetics books waiting to be read.
Okay.
Um,
So do I.
it's I know I've spoken to my friends also that are in an apologetics book club that we co-host, and it's the same thing for them, that they say at first, when you start to learn about apologetics, you tend to become like very interested in the topic, and you just can't get enough books on it.
Mhm. Right. I
Um,
think it's intellectually exciting and gratifying. And you do have to go through some struggles sometimes, because if you consider some of the things that unbelievers say against Christianity, you might not immediately have a good response. So you have to scratch your head and say, okay, I need to get busy, get to work, and figure out what to do. In fact, I became a Christian in 1976, and I'm 65 years old. But 2 years ago, I was really researching the atoning death of Christ. And I was looking into a particular heretic named Socinus, who had attacked the biblical doctrine of the atonement. And I had written on this before, I'd studied it, but I'd never gone into this as deeply as I did especially the summer of 2020. And as I read some of his criticisms, at first I thought, that's a good point. I'm not quite sure what to say about that. But it didn't take long. I thought about it, prayed about it, read works. Bill Craig has a fairly new book out called what's it called? The Atonement and Death of Christ, I think, which helped me on a lot of things. And I looked into previous theologians and all the rest of it. But even as a well-seasoned Christian philosopher who had written, 13 books at that point, that guy, Socinus, gave me a run for the money. But I just, bore down. I wasn't really worried about it. It just wasn't an instant answer to some of his claims. Let me give you one of them. He said, well, how could Jesus atone for all of our sin and take hell for us, so to speak, if he only suffered for a short period of time on the cross? Hell is eternal punishment. So how could a finite period of time for punishment atone for an infinite punishment? And I had heard that argument before and responded to it, but I got into it more deeply. And the basic answer is that because Christ was sinless and perfectly righteous, and he was God incarnate, he could accomplish that, representing the human race. He didn't have to suffer eternally in terms of a quantity of time, but the intensity or the quality of suffering was sufficient to atone for the wrath of God. So that was one of the critiques, and then there were two or three others that I responded to. So the new edition of Christian Apologetics has 2 chapters on the atonement of Christ. And the first edition only talked about it for 4 or 5 pages. And I realized that I had a whole lot on the deity of Christ, the miracles of Christ, the resurrection of Christ, but really not enough about his cross and the atonement. And I really learned and was very enriched by studying that and really getting into it. I don't think in all my years of higher education, graduate school, writing, debating, I don't think I ever worked harder on anything than those 2 chapters. It was very challenging and very rewarding. I'm glad that the book's out there in the world. I hope it will really fortify Christians and challenge non-Christians to bow their knee to Jesus Christ, who died to atone for the sins of the world and rose from the dead, ascended to the right hand of the Father, and he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And the quicker we realize that, the better.